This morning, I'm just going to title this devotional, Change the Hardware. Change the Hardware. Now, as you all know, I'm often just in everyday life listening to hear what God is saying in different situations. I think that everything that happens, there is a message that we can hear from God in that particular situation. And this past week, I had to call a locksmith to come and to change the locks on several doors. And when the locksmith arrived, they did change the locks on some of the doors. But he got to one particular door and he says, there is nothing I can do with it. It's not the lock. It's the hardware. And he began to tell me that he could do all that he wanted to do to, have a new key made. It was not going to work because that door had a hardware problem. The mechanisms in the lock were fine. The key was fine. The lock itself was fine. But the door's hardware, the hinges, the alignment, the frame was all off. And because the hardware was out of alignment, the lock could not function the way it was designed to function, no matter what he did. He said, you're not going to be satisfied with this door until the hardware is changed. And when he said that, it struck me that this is exactly what happens in our spiritual lives. The lock is not the problem. And many times we're trying to change the lock. We think the problem sometimes with our spiritual life is because, well, we say it, my prayer life isn't working. My faith isn't working. The word isn't working. The sermons are not working. But the truth is, those things are the locks. And they're not the problem. God's word still works. Prayer still works. Faith still works. Preaching still works. But the issue may be something in the hardware of our lives. And when the hardware is out of alignment, we can read the word, we can pray, we can exercise faith, all of the above. But if we do nothing to the hardware, then all of those things will appear to be of null effect. Psalms 11:3 says, if the foundation be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now hear that. He says the foundation is the problem. If the structure is wrong, the system cannot function correctly. Just like that door, just like that lock, just like that hardware. The lock could not engage because the door was not lined up with the frame. And sometimes in life, our attitudes are out of alignment, our priorities are out of alignment, our obedience is out of alignment, and we just want to read the word and have things work. No, we've got to get things in alignment. So when we're asking God to fix the lock, when God is saying, no, the problem is not the lock, the problem is the hardware. There needs to be a spiritual alignment because we are often spiritually misaligned. And there are people who say, I'm reading the Bible, but nothing is happening. But if bitterness in the heart, if there's unforgiveness in the heart, if there's disobedience in the heart, the lock may be fine, but the hardware is out of alignment. So Jesus says something very revealing in Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. He says, if you bring your gift to the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave the gift and go get things right first. Why? Because worship was not the problem. The hardware was the problem. And the good news is that God fixes the hardware. He's not untrained and not able to fix hardware. Now, when the gentleman told me that I had a hardware problem, he says, now, changing this key is easy. All I got to do is make a few adjustments. But this hardware is going to be costly. It's going to take more time. And when he sent me the estimate on the hardware, it blew me away. I'm like, I could buy a whole new door. But even if I bought a new door, I still got to have hardware for the door. The good news again, God fixes the structure, fixes the hardware. Sometimes God does not immediately answer our prayers because he's adjusting the hinges of our lives. We want God to answer that prayer. And he's a, no, 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 no. Right now, I'm not doing that. We're going to work on the hardware. So he starts aligning our thinking, aligning our motives, and aligning our relationships, and aligning our obedience. Because when the hardware is aligned, the lock will work exactly the way it was designed to work. God specializes in fixing hardware. That's what Ezekiel 36:26 is saying. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And oh God, that's the hardware. I'll change the structure of who you are. I'll change the way you think. I'll change your motives. I'll change your relationships. I'll change your obedience. I'll change that bitterness because I'm God. I don't just change your circumstances. I don't just change your problems. I change your structure, change your heart, change your spirit, change your mindset. May not be simple and easy, but he puts us in alignment. And when that hardware gets fixed, the guy left telling me, he said, when I come back and fix this hardware, you won't have any problem with this door. The lock will click effortlessly when I change this hardware. It may be the same lock, may be the same key, maybe even the same door. But when the alignment changes, everything works better. And that's what happens when God aligns our lives. Suddenly, our prayer starts to work more fervently and effectively. Suddenly our worship becomes more real and the word becomes more open and we can feel a difference. Not because the lock changed, but because God fixed the hardware. Maybe there's someone listening to me this morning. It feels like things in your life just are not working. Your faith feels difficult. Your peace feels distant. Your prayer feels empty. But before you assume the lock is broken, ask God to examine the hardware. Because when God aligns your heart, your life, and your priorities, when he aligns that, everything begins to function the way it was designed. And you will discover something powerful. God's system was never broken. His word was never broken. Faith was never broken. He was just waiting for the hardware to get fixed. Change the hardware.